Hello everyone, welcome back to the Flix Files. Before we get into today's video, I just want to say this right up front. If you really enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you've watched some of my other videos and you've enjoyed them, please subscribe. I'm trying to grow the channel and it would mean a lot to me. There's a lot of people that seem to watch my videos that haven't yet subscribed. So yeah, just hit that subscribe button. It doesn't cost anything. It's completely free as long as you have a YouTube account and they don't cost anything. It would really help me out. So thank you so much for that. So let's get on with the video. I guess my first introduction to the writer Stephen King was around 1984 when I saw Stanley Kubrick's The Shining on a VHS rental tape, and seeing King's name appear in the opening credits along with a title that said based upon the novel by. It was something that caught my eye each time I rewatched that movie, and trust me, I rewatched it a lot. And it turned into a sort of promise to myself that I should really find a copy of the book that the film was based on and give it a read, because I was already becoming a huge fan of that movie. I'd have probably seen John Carpenter's movie Christine around the same time and saw once again that it was also based on a book by some guy called Stephen King. And having watched both of those movies fairly close to each other, and having enjoyed both of them immensely, it was Christine that actually became the first Stephen King novel that I read as a teenager, which I got as a paperback after pestering my parents to buy me a copy. Up to that point, the few books I'd read were either the Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy books, or those choose-your-own-adventure novels that I was really addicted to. Needless to say, this was a huge moment for me, and I still have that book today, 40 odd years later. Reading the book of Christine and discovering how the characters I'd seen in the movie were being fleshed out on the page was both really enjoyable and illuminating. In fact, I had such a great time reading it that I decided I then wanted the paperback of The Shining. So once again, I managed to get my parents to get me a copy soon after. Now this proved to be a real eye-opener of a book for me, as whilst it had the same characters and setting as the film, it's a very different beast and was more focused on the hotel being evil and its attempts at possessing Jack, who is struggling with being a recovering alcoholic. It also ended differently, with the Overlook Hotel being completely destroyed in an explosion caused by pressure buildup in the hotel's boiler. It was at some point in 1986 that I watched a programme that was being shown very late one Saturday night on television, and it was called Stephen King's World of Horror. This was a real gem of a discovery for me, as it had many interview clips with King talking about his influences and how he approached writing. And at a time way before the internet, it was a fascinating insight into a writer who was slowly becoming a bit of an obsession for me.
He's real fat and she's real skinny, and so he catches her and he's got an air compressor and he says, "Try this, Mabel," and he stuffs the hose down her throat and turns it on, and she blows up until finally she explodes and guts go everywhere.
But it was when I got the first hardback edition of Stephen King's 1986 novel It that I truly became a huge fan. This is probably my most favourite novel of his, and it paved the way to me collecting a good number of his books throughout my late teenage years and into my 20s, all the while keeping a close eye on any movie adaptations of his books. As of me making this video in August of 2025, there have been nearly 70 movie adaptations of his books and short stories, with some of them, such as The Running Man and the upcoming film The Long Walk, being culled from his writings under his pseudonym Richard Bachman. I have about 15 of his movie adaptations in my Blu-ray collection, and I thought it would be fun to pick 10 of my absolute favourites of those and rank them in order. To be clear, this is not a ranking of their faithfulness as adaptations from the original King novels, but more of a top 10 of my favourite movies based on his books that I personally have in my collection. So there may be some Stephen King films you know of that aren't in my top 10, Now that's simply because I either don't yet own them on physical media, or I'm not quite as fond of them as the ones I'm choosing. So all that being said, let's start with my first choice coming in at number 10. Firestarter is a 1984 American science fiction thriller based on Stephen King's 1980 novel of the same name. The plot concerns a young girl named Charlie who develops pyrokinesis, or the ability to create fire through thought, and the secret government agency known as the Shop, who seeks to control her and use her powers to their own ends. The film was directed by Mark L. Lester, who would go on to direct the Arnold Schwarzenegger action vehicle Commando in the following year. Drew Barrymore plays Charlie, and co-stars include David Keith as Charlie's father, with Martin Sheen and George C. Scott playing the bad guys. The movie has some terrific practical effects once Charlie gets into her groove, and George C. Scott is particularly effective as the creepy John Rainbird, who attempts to befriend Charlie later on in the movie. It Chapter 1 is a 2017 supernatural horror film based on Stephen King's 1986 novel of the same name. Set in the small fictional town of Derry, Maine, the plot covers the first chronological half of the book, in which a group of 7 outcast children, called the Losers Club, are terrorized by a strange being that emerges from the sewers and takes the form of the evil Pennywise, the dancing clown. The film was directed by Andy Muschietti, who would go on to direct Chapter 2 a few years later, as well as the huge box office flop The Flash. The film is a pretty faithful adaptation of the best half of the original book, the only major difference being that the movie is set in 1988, whereas in the novel the children were growing up in the 1950s. The sequel focused on the Losers Club as adults, and is the weaker of the two films, and in my opinion the weaker part of the original novel. The Dead Zone is a 1983 science fiction thriller which was directed by David Cronenberg, and it's based on King's book of the same name from 1979. It stars Christopher Walken, Tom Skerritt, Herbert Lom and Martin Sheen. Walken plays a schoolteacher called Johnny Smith who awakens from a coma after a car accident, only to discover that he now has psychic powers, and they enable him to see major moments in a person's future by simply touching them. The dead zone of the title refers to an outcome that is not yet determined, meaning that Johnny can change the future to help people, such as avoiding accidents or even their own death. Walken is fantastic in this as the main character, stricken with a gift he doesn't really want, but ultimately realises he can use it for a greater good as we get near the end of the movie. In 7th position, I've picked Christine, which is a 1983 supernatural horror film directed by the brilliant John Carpenter, and this is based on King's 1983 novel of the same title. It stars Keith Gordon, John Stockwell and Harry Dean Stanton. The movie charts the changes in the lives of Arnie Cunningham, his friends, his family and his teenage enemies after he buys a classic red and white 1958 Plymouth Fury named Christine, a car that seems to have a mind of its own and a jealous, possessive personality, all of which begin to have a bad influence on Arnie as he struggles to restore the car whilst juggling a new girlfriend in his school life. Carpenter's love of the widescreen format is in full effect here, and he really builds the atmosphere and malevolence of Christine once she's restored to her full evil beauty. Coming in at number 6 is Stand By Me, a 1986 American coming-of-age drama film directed by Rob Reiner, and this is based on Stephen King's 1982 novella called The Body. Set in the fictional town of Castle Rock, Oregon in 1959, the film follows 4 boys on a journey to find the body of a missing boy who was supposedly killed after being hit by a train. The story reflects on childhood friendship, grief, and the emotional complexities of growing up, and stars Will Wheaton, River Phoenix, Corey Feldman, and Jerry O'Connell. The young cast are all superb in their respective roles, and the film presents a heady mix of comedy, thrills, and emotion as the 4 boys make their trek to find the body of a dead boy. In 5th position is Dr. Sleep, a 2019 supernatural horror film which was written, directed, and edited by Mike Flanagan. It's a film adaptation of a 2013 novel by Stephen King and serves as a sequel to The Shining. The film stars Ewan McGregor given a star turn as the now grown-up Danny Torrance, still burdened with his psychic abilities and a drinking problem, who struggles with childhood trauma caused by the horrors at the Overlook Hotel. Rebecca Ferguson is also excellent as Rose the Hat, the leader of a small group of psychic vampires that hunt down people with the Shining and feed on their steam, which is essentially their life force. It's a superb movie and a fitting sequel to the classic that is the original. If you haven't seen this movie, I would definitely recommend watching the 3-hour extended version, which includes an additional 30 minutes of footage. At number 4 is The Green Mile, a 1999 film written and directed by Frank Darabont and based on the 1996 novel by Stephen King. It stars Tom Hanks as a death row prison guard during the Great Depression who witnesses supernatural events following the arrival of an enigmatic convict at his facility. This is the second feature directed by Darabont that's based on a Stephen King novel, and he does a simply fantastic job here, crafting a full character-driven piece that clocks in at a speedy 3 hours, aided by a strong supporting cast including Michael Clarke Duncan, Michael Jeter, David Morse, and Sam Rockwell. The time flies by, and this is movie making on a really high level. Misery is a 1990 American psychological horror film directed by Rob Reiner. It's based on Stephen King's 1987 novel of the same name and stars James Caan as famed novelist Paul Sheldon, who, following a car accident whilst driving in heavy snow, is rescued by an obsessive fan, played by the absolutely brilliant Kathy Bates. The film plays out as she holds him captive and forces him to rewrite his new novel after she learns he plans to kill the lead character. Like Darabont, this is the second feature Rob Reiner has directed, based on a work by Stephen King. Both Caan and Bates are superb, carrying the majority of the movie between them, and Reiner's direction ratchets up the tension as it builds to a horrific and satisfying climax. This is definitely worthy of being in 3rd place in my top 10. So in 2nd place, I've picked The Shawshank Redemption. This is a 1994 prison drama written and directed by Frank Darabont, based on the 1982 Stephen King novella titled Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption. This film tells the story of a banker named Andy Dufresne, played by Tim Robbins, who is sentenced to life in Shawshank State Penitentiary for the murders of his wife and her lover, despite his many claims of innocence. Over the following 2 decades, he befriends a fellow prisoner, contraband smuggler Red, fantastically played by Morgan Freeman. The film follows their growing friendship through the years, culminating in Dufresne's plan to attempt to break out of Shawshank Prison after he learns from a fellow inmate that a prisoner he once shared a cell with admitted to the murders of which Andy was convicted. This is a beautifully told story of friendship and male bonding, and culminates in a wholly satisfying ending that's guaranteed to leave a lump in your throat. I'm sure at this point you can all guess what my number one choice is, and that is the 1980 movie The Shining, produced and directed by the master Stanley Kubrick. It's loosely based on Stephen King's 1977 novel and stars Jack Nicholson, Shelley Duvall, Danny Lloyd and Scatman Crothers. The film presents the descent into insanity of a recovering alcoholic and aspiring novelist who takes a job as a winter caretaker for a mountain resort hotel, along with his wife and clairvoyant son. This was the second Kubrick movie I ever saw after 2001: A Space Odyssey, and it didn't disappoint. I rank this movie, along with The Shawshank Redemption, as being in my top 10 favourite films of all time, and for very good reason. It's a superbly crafted piece of work with incredible performances from Nicholson and Duvall. I always recommend the extended version of the film as it was originally released in America, which is about 30 minutes longer than the original European version that I first saw back in the 1980s. This is the version available on the Blu-ray and 4K editions, so is easily available. A true masterpiece of a horror film and a worthy winner in my Stephen King top 10. So there we are, that is my top 10 films based on Stephen King novels. Again, I'm aware there are many other films that have been released based on Stephen King's work, and you may rank them in your top 10. If I haven't, it's either because I'm not as big a fan of them or I may not have seen them. There are quite a few films that have been made based on his books that I've not watched for one reason or another. But that's my top 10. They're the films that I really like. Before I end this video, I just want to quickly mention the book side of Stephen King. I was quite a big collector of his books as a younger person. But as I got into my late 20s and early 30s, I kind of drifted away from Stephen King. But now I'm sort of semi-retired. I have a bit more time on my hands, so I'm getting back into his books to the point that I actually bought his newest book in hardback. So I'm going to give that a read and see if he's still got it. I'm sure he has. But in terms of my favourite Stephen King books, I've already mentioned one of them, which I have here. My absolute favourite Stephen King book is Stephen King's It. I don't know whether you can see that. This is the hardback version, and it's actually the first edition. When I was kind of getting into my late teens, I signed up to one of these book clubs that used to be all the rage back then, where they would have kind of a book of the month that they would send you. Otherwise, you could select a book from a choice every month. And that was a great source for getting hardback books that were brand new, that had just been published. So quite a few of my Stephen King hardback books I got through that club. So they're all kind of the first editions from sort of the 1980s. So I've always been really happy that I've got it as a hardback. But in terms of my second favourite Stephen King book, I would say it would have to be The Stand, of which again I have the hardback version here. This is actually a slightly later hardback edition, which is the complete and uncut edition, because it's one of those books that's had a number of publications. It's had a different versions that have been released over the years, but this is sort of the full kind of director's cut version of the book. And it is a great read, and I would say that is my second favourite Stephen King novel. Interestingly, that has had a number of adaptations over the years, mainly as kind of TV movies, and none of them have ever kind of grasped the essence of the book for me. So I'm hoping that one day we will get a definitive adaptation of The Stand but I live in hope. So there we are. That's my Stephen King video. I hope you enjoyed that. As I said at the beginning of the video, if you enjoyed this, give me a thumbs up, and please consider subscribing if you haven't already. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you very, very soon. Bye for now.